It says, have you ever read any novels, poems, or other literary forms, or watched any fictional TV films slash TV shows that explicitly or implicitly deal with climate change? For me, it's a yes. I think almost anyone nowadays that should be a yes. It's pretty hard to watch something that isn't somehow directly or indirectly involved or related with climate change in pop culture or just media in general. Um, I guess books is probably easier to avoid that, but in like movies, it's near impossible, and that's a good thing in my opinion. But like, I mean, there's a huge movie about it last year. I think it was called like "Don't Look Up." I don't think it was very good, but like the message was, I guess, it's pretty hard to avoid that. But for me, a piece of media, or I guess literature, that I really enjoyed, especially when I was young, dealing with this topic of climate change and just kind of, I guess, exploitation of resources in general, would be Dune. I remember reading that in either seventh or eighth grade. It was like tail end of middle school, kind of tail end of my career as an avid reader. Recently picked it back up, but I took like a little, was that 5 6 year hiatus off of that. A little bit of a bummer in retrospect, but hey, we're back. Um, yeah, I remember reading Dune, and it was one of the first pieces that kind of, it wasn't super explicit about climate change. I don't think that was one of the, it was probably stronger about colonialism and corporate greed than climate change. But I do remember, like, or at least even today, whenever someone will talk about what the Earth will look like in like 200 years if we continue our pace, the image in my mind is from Dune, like the covers of the books and stuff, and I guess the movie that came out now. But that book was pretty impactful, I guess, because even to this day, I'll still get a little memory here and there about it, especially when people are discussing climate change or, I guess, like a dystopian future. And I do believe that it was pretty related to climate change. It's been many years, so it's kind of hard for me to say with strong certainty, but it was definitely like at least tangentially aligned with climate change. It probably, from my memory, kind of focused more on, like I said, like exploitation, I guess, by like, in the book, it wasn't really corporations, but I think it was kind of, in their universe, it was kind of, I think it was calling out corporations without, in the universe, having it be corporations. In the universe, it was like kingdoms or like empires or something like that would exploit other ones. But it was pretty, I'd say pretty easy to infer that maybe it was talking about like oil extraction or something similar to that when it's talking about the spice extraction and that type of thing. But that was definitely the first big piece of media, and probably even now most impactful piece of media regarding climate change really stuck with me. I mean, I've read and digested other pieces that were definitely more related to climate change, probably more informative, probably even better written. But it's, for some reason, just maybe it was because I was young when I read it, that one really just stuck with me much more. And how do I feel that experience or lack of experience relates to the reading and perspective offered by Amativ Ghosh? I butchered that. In The Great Derangement. Yeah, that's interesting, because this would be a book that his take would be that it's not good, because it's fiction. But for me, it was a piece of fiction that was really helpful for understanding severity of our situation, consequences of our actions, and consequences of exploitation of the environment, I guess just colonialism in general. So I guess his perspective would be that it's not good, but my personal perspective, I think it was really useful, that piece of fiction. I believe it was also one of the early pieces of, I guess, like, climate fiction, if you want to call it that. And I think that was good for me to read, although I bet Ghosh would disagree to some extent. How this week's reading sustained thinking about literary narrative maps and your own experience of reading novels, poems, and watching films, television. Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of Ghosh's points do apply. It kind of does maybe take away from the point a little bit to some extent, especially as Dune is a bad example. It's not super focused on climate change. I mean, it is, but it's not the driving plot point, I guess. So I guess, I don't know, man, honestly. I'm still not 100% on Ghosh's ideas. I have to reread that. I thought I read it and understood it, and then I read it again and realized I didn't, or skimmed it again right before I was answering the questions. It was like, yeah, I did not digest enough of that. So I'm going to reread that part this week, along with the next reading, because it was pretty dense stuff. So I think I gotta give it one or two more passes to fully digest it, understand his thinking. Um, but I would say for me that experience definitely was positive. Climate fiction and reading that, especially at a young age, I think it made it much more digestible, and it kind of gave me something to apply to other things. Like it helps me visualize what the futures that we're trying to avoid. So I do think that it was pretty solid. Although, I mean, maybe it writes off climate change as just like some fictional tale or something because it's in the fiction category. But I don't know. To me, it was good. Uh, yeah. In this week's reading, sustained thinking about literary narrative maps, it definitely has changed my own perspective on my experience of reading novels, poems, or watching films and television. But it won't necessarily change the past. It'll just change my perspective on the past. I still think that it was pretty positive for me to digest the fiction or climate fiction, I think as we call it. I was reading an article about it, just kind of freshen up my memory on doing because it's been so long. And they had a pretty interesting quote by the author that was, it seems like he had he was ahead of his time, I guess. And this book was good for promoting ideas about climate change in a time when it wasn't super popular. This was in 1970 on the first Earth Day. Frank Herbert, who apparently is from Seattle, which is pretty tight, I thought. Near Seattle, so it's probably like, it's a quality, we say anything's near Seattle. He spoke to 30,000 people in Philadelphia, and he told them, I don't want to be in the position of telling my grandchildren, I'm sorry, there's no more Earth left for you. So, I think that shows that Dune had a pretty good element. The author had good intentions, at least, when regarding climate change and spreading awareness and not dumbing it down. So, probably been all over the place in this. But I would say that Dune and other things had a positive impact on my relationship to understanding climate change, especially from, the exploitation angle, even exploitation of humans angle, and, how it disproportionately affects. Oh, I guess it even kind of showed how it disproportionately affects indigenous peoples. Yeah, I guess so. I think Dune was good for a lot of things. Ghosh might disagree with me, but yeah.